Welcome to Channel Tune of Revenge. The first time they called me Barren, my husband didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like a locked safe. Doctor, Pritchard stood in the sunlight of our parlor with his black bag open on the table. The way a preacher opens a Bible before he says the part that breaks your life in half. He spoke softly, as if softness could make the words less sharp. Mrs. Renford, he said, your womb has closed upon itself. It is a condition I have seen in women who have endured strain. You may be a devoted wife in every other way, but you will not bear a child. I remember the exact second the room stopped being my home because Malcolm Renford, my husband, the banker turned planter, the man who needed an heir like a drowning man, needed air, smiled as if he'd just been handed permission, not permission to grieve, permission to act. He poured 2 fingers of brandy, drank it without tasting, and said almost pleasantly, "Then we will solve the problem in a way Georgia understands." I didn't understand what he meant until 3 mornings later, when the carriage returned from Savannah with a man in chains, sitting on the straw like a purchase wrapped in iron, a stud, the trader called him, grinning with missing teeth. Strong as a mule, quiet as a priest, proven, and Malcolm, my Malcolm, held the bill of sale like it was a baptism certificate. If you're listening right now, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And while you're there, tell me this. If you were me, would you run that night, or would you stay long enough to find out what your husband was really hiding? Because that's the thing no one tells you about a scandal. The filth isn't always in the act, sometimes it's in the reason, and I didn't understand Malcolm's reason until the stable door shut with a new lock and I heard his key turn from the outside. Georgia 1838. Renford House sat on a rise of live oaks and pride, a white column monument overlooking cotton fields that looked from a distance like a peaceful sea. From up close, it looked like work and heat and bodies moving too slowly because moving too fast meant pain. Malcolm loved the view. He used to stand on the veranda and say, "This is what certainty looks like, Adelaide." A certainty, that was Malcolm's true religion. He was 36 and already respected in Savannah banking circles, a man who'd clawed his way out of nothing and refused to ever feel powerless again. When his father died, Malcolm inherited debt. When Malcolm's first partner cheated him, Malcolm learned to cheat first. When the market tightened, Malcolm bought land because land didn't ask questions and cotton didn't gossip. Then he married me, not because he loved me the way girls dream of love, because I came with a dowry and a surname that soothed nervous investors. Adelaide Harrove, daughter of a shipping family whose money smelled like salt and overseas contracts. Malcolm liked the way my name sounded next to his, like velvet over iron. For 2 years, our marriage was a performance. Dinners, hymns, church smiles, Malcolm's hand at my back like a claim, and in private a colder kind of tenderness. Malcolm's eyes always measuring, always calculating. When my monthly bleeding arrived again and again, Malcolm's jaw tightened. When the women at church began to tilt their heads and say, "You're still so slim, Adelaide," Malcolm began leaving the dinner table early and staying late in his office. That office became his confessional. Ledgers stacked like tombstones, letters sealed with wax, a heavy iron box under the desk that Malcolm never let me touch. He would kiss my forehead and say, "We'll have time, don't worry." But then in the spring of 1838, he hired Dr. Pritchard. The doctor arrived with polished boots and a gentle voice, the kind of man who smiled as he hurt you because he believed the hurting was necessary. He examined me in my bedroom with my maid Ruth turning her face toward the wall. He asked questions that made my skin crawl. He pressed and prodded and murmured Latin, as if Latin could make cruelty respectable, and then he pronounced his verdict in the parlor like a judge. Barren, useless in the only way Malcolm measured a wife. I watched Malcolm's smile form, and for the first time since our wedding, I understood what it meant to be truly alone in a house full of people, because Malcolm didn't reach for my hand after the doctor left. He reached for his coat. "I'm going to Savannah," he said. "For what?" My voice sounded wrong, too thin. He paused at the doorway, turning just enough for me to see the side of his face. "To buy certainty." Savannah's slave market was loud in a way polite society pretended not to hear. Men shouted prices. Women cried quietly. Children stared at nothing, because staring at something meant hope, and hope could get you killed inside. Malcolm took me with him, not because he wanted my opinion, because he wanted me to understand that my body had become a public problem, and he would solve it publicly if he had to. He walked with the slow confidence of a man who knew the world would make space for him. I walked beside him in a pale dress that suddenly felt like a costume for a funeral. We passed cages. We passed auction blocks. We passed a trader holding a thin girl by the elbow, lifting her chin to show her teeth like she was a horse. Then Malcolm stopped. A man stood on a low platform with his wrists in chains and his shirt open at the throat. Not to seduce, nothing so simple, but to display his strength. His skin was dark, his shoulders broad, his eyes steady in a way that made the surrounding chaos seem foolish. He didn't look around like an animal searching for escape. He looked straight ahead like someone who had learned that looking away only invited attention. The trader leaned toward Malcolm. "That one's special." Malcolm's gaze didn't flicker. "Name, Illy," the trader said. "Don't know his true one. Came in from up country with papers that vanished. Funny thing, paperwork does. But his body is real, strong, quiet, no trouble," and the trader grinned, voice lowering as if sharing a joke. "He's been used for breeding work. He'll do what he's told." I felt my throat close. Malcolm didn't even glance at me when he asked, "How much?" Money changed hands like a handshake, and just like that, the man on the platform belonged to my husband. Illy's eyes shifted. Then one quick glance toward Malcolm, then toward me, not pleading, not angry, just aware, as if he'd already guessed the shape of the cage we were about to share. Malcolm signed the bill of sale, then said something that still echoes in my bones. "He will be kept on my property," Malcolm told the trader, "and he will be used as needed. If he tries to run, you will take him back. If he becomes troublesome, you will take him back. And if he ever speaks about his duties." Malcolm smiled again, smooth as oil. "You will take him back." The traitor chuckled, of course. Then Malcolm turned to me as if we were discussing a new stallion. "We'll have our heir by Christmas," he said. I whispered, "You can't." Malcolm's eyes hardened. "You can. You will." The ride back to Renford House was silent, except for the creak of wheels and the occasional clink of chain. Illy sat in the back carriage with two men holding rifles, as if a chained man needed more proof of power. I sat in the front carriage beside Malcolm, my hands folded in my lap so I wouldn't claw my own skin. When we arrived, Malcolm did not take Illy to the quarters. He took him to the stable, and he ordered the stable boy to install a new lock. "A lock?" I asked, voice trembling. Malcolm didn't look up from the key he was turning in his fingers. "Privacy. For what?" "For my family business," he said, and then added almost gently, "Don't make me repeat myself, Adelaide." That night he summoned Dr. Pritchard again. The doctor came after supper, slipping through the house like a man visiting a sick patient, not a man about to supervise something unspeakable. He sat in the parlor with Malcolm and spoke in that soft, careful tone. "Many respectable households," Dr. Pritchard said, "have solved difficulties in discreet ways. The child will be yours by law and by society, if you are wise. The father's identity," he nodded toward the window, toward the stable beyond the trees, "can remain a matter of silence." My stomach turned. Malcolm's voice was calm. "It will. Dr. Pritchard looked at me like I was a stubborn child. Mrs. Renford, you must understand your duty. Your husband requires an heir. The estate requires stability. I said, that man is a human being. Dr. Pritchard blinked, then smiled as if I'd made a charming mistake. Mrs. Renford, we do not change the world in our parlour. We live in it. Then Malcolm stood. He took my elbow, not roughly, but firmly, and guided me toward the back door, not to my bedroom, not to the chapel, to the stable. The night air smelled of hay and warm animal breath. The lantern cast long shadows that made everything look like a warning. Illy stood inside the stall area, wrists free now, but with iron still around his ankles. His eyes tracked me, then Malcolm, then the doctor. Malcolm's hand tightened on my elbow. This is how it will be, he said quietly, almost kindly. You will be here when I say. You will leave when I say, and when the child comes, you will smile and thank God. Illy's voice, when it came, was low and controlled. Ma'am, that single word, ma'am, was like a rope tossed to a drowning person. Not because it was romantic, because it was respectful, because it reminded me I was still a person, not just a vessel in Malcolm's plan. I swallowed. Illy, Malcolm unlocked the stable door. Then he stepped outside and the lock clicked. Dr. Pritchard lingered a second longer, eyes on me. Do not make a scene. He whispered as if my dignity was a nuisance. It will be easier if you accept it. Then he left too, and the key turned. I stood in a stable with a man who did not belong to me, and a fate that did. In the silence, Illy spoke again, careful. I won't touch you, ma'am. Not unless you tell me. My breath caught, because consent, real consent, was a miracle in a place built to crush it, and that was the first twist I didn't expect. The stud Malcolm bought was the only man in the story who refused to treat me like property. The next morning, Malcolm acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He ate breakfast, read his mail, discussed cotton yields with his overseer, and kissed my cheek like we were newlyweds. I stared at him, wondering if I'd dreamed the lock. Then he leaned close and murmured, tonight I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Ruth, my maid, watched me too closely. Ruth had been with me since the wedding. She was quick, quiet, and always seemed to appear when I needed something. My shawl, my gloves, a glass of water. I had once mistaken that for loyalty. Now I wondered if it was surveillance, because after breakfast I found something on my vanity, a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath my hairbrush. No signature, no greeting, just 6 words written in a sharp, confident hand. Barren is a verdict they sell. I read it twice, then a third time because my mind refused to accept it. Dr. Pritchard sold my Baroness. How? Why? I slid the note into my sleeve just as Ruth entered with fresh linens. Her eyes flicked to my hands. You look pale, Mom, she said. I didn't sleep, she nodded, too calm. Shall I send for the doctor? My stomach twisted. No, I said sharply. Ruth blinked once, then lowered her gaze. As you wish. As she left, I felt something colder than fear settle in my chest. If someone was warning me, then someone else already knew. And if people already knew, then Malcolm's privacy was a lie. It wasn't secrecy he wanted, it was control. That afternoon, I went where Malcolm never expected me to go, his office. He kept it locked when he was away, but I had watched him long enough to know where he hid his key. Beneath the false bottom of a porcelain bowl on the mantel, disguised beneath loose coins, I told myself I was only looking for proof that Dr. Pritchard had lied, but the moment I stepped inside, I realized Malcolm's secrets were not shaped like one lie. They were shaped like a whole life. The room smelled of ink, leather, and a faint metallic tang, money, old paper, and something like panic. Ledgers lined the shelves. A map of Georgia hung on the wall with pins stuck into counties like nails in a coffin. Letters were stacked in neat piles, each sealed with wax stamped with the W. Renford Bank. My eyes landed on the iron box beneath the desk. I knelt, fingers trembling, and tested the latch. Locked, of course. I turned toward the desk drawers instead. The top drawer held harmless things, quills, a knife, receipts. The second drawer held a small leather book with a clasp. I opened it. At first glance, it looked like a normal ledger, names, numbers, dates. Then I saw the heading Discrete Disbursements. My throat tightened. Under that heading were payments to names I recognized. Men in Savannah, a judge's clerk, a ship captain. And then in Malcolm's precise hand, Dr. H. Pritchard, 300. April 1838. Consultation. Dr. H. Pritchard, $300. May 1838. Follow-up. My hands shook. $300 was not a consultation. It was a bribe. The note in my sleeve suddenly felt like a torch. Barren is a verdict they sell. I flipped further. More payments, more consultations, and then one line that made my stomach drop. Trader C. Lassie 6, 150, June 1838. Purchase Illy. My pulse roared. Malcolm hadn't just bought Illy. He had planned him, recorded him, as if Illy were part of a business strategy, not a desperate act, a calculated one. I heard footsteps in the hall and snapped the book shut, shoving it back into the drawer just as the door handle rattled. Adelaide, Malcolm's voice. I backed away from the desk, smoothing my skirt, forcing my face into a calm mask. Malcolm entered, eyes narrowing when he saw me. What are you doing in here? I lifted my chin. Looking for you. A slow smile. Liar. He crossed the room, fingers brushing the desk edge like he was checking if anything had been disturbed. His gaze flicked to the drawers. My skin prickled. Then he looked at my face, and something like satisfaction warmed his eyes. Tonight, he repeated softly, and Adelaide, don't make me regret my generosity. Generosity as if you were giving me a gift, as if you were not turning my life into a transaction. When he left, I exhaled shakily and realized something worse than the lock. The lock was only the visible part. The real cage was paperwork, and Malcolm had been building it around me for months. That evening I did something reckless. I went to the stable before Malcolm summoned me not to submit, to speak. The stable was dim, the air thick with hay dust. Illy sat on a low stool, wrists now free, but chains still at his ankles. A cruel compromise Malcolm probably thought made him look merciful. Illy looked up when I entered, and for a second I saw something in his eyes that startled me. Not hunger, not fear, calculation, as if he was reading the room like a man used to traps. I whispered, Illy, I found records. His face didn't change, but his shoulders tightened slightly. Records, payments. I said to Dr. Pritchard, to the traitor. Malcolm planned this. Illy's jaw clenched. I know the type of men who plan. I swallowed. Someone left me a note. They said Barren is a verdict they sell. For the first time, Illy's composure cracked, his eyes sharpened. You got a note like that. You know what it means, I asked. Illy hesitated, then spoke carefully, as if every word was expensive. I've been on 2 plantations, he said. First one, a doctor said the mistress couldn't have children. Then she got pregnant after they started bringing men in at night. The master bragged like God chose him, but the doctor got paid and the men disappeared. My blood ran cold. Disappeared. How? Illy's eyes flicked away. Sold off or worse. The silence stretched between us like a wire. Then Illy said quietly, Ma'am, I didn't come here by a normal road. I wasn't born on a plantation. I stared. What? His voice lowered. My mama was free in South Carolina. I was free. I had papers. I could read. I worked on docks. Then one night, men grabbed me, took my papers, sold me. My breath caught. Kidnapped, not purchased. Stolen. Do you have proof? I whispered. Illy nodded once. I hid something, but I can't reach it while I'm chained. My mind raced fast and frantic. If Illy was kidnapped, Then Malcolm's purchase was illegal. Even in a world that loved slavery, kidnapping a free man was still a crime if the right people cared. And Malcolm was a banker. He cared about laws when laws protected him. Where is the proof? I asked. Illy's eyes met mine, steady in the lining of my boot. I stared at his boots, worn, cracked leather. If I could get them without Malcolm noticing. The stable door creaked. I spun. Ruth stood there with a lantern, her expression unreadable. "Mom," she said softly, "Master Enford is looking for you." My stomach sank. Ruth's gaze flicked to Illy, then back to me. Something in her eyes looked almost apologetic, almost as if she'd been ordered to watch and hated it. As she led me back toward the house, she whispered without turning her head, "Don't trust the doctor." Then she walked away, leaving me with the weight of a new truth. I wasn't the only prisoner in my own home. That night, Malcolm did not come to the stable. Dr. Pritchard did. He entered alone with the lantern, his face calm, his voice gentle. He looked at Illy like Illy was furniture. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Renford," he said softly, "your husband is a man under great strain. You can make his life easier." I said through clenched teeth, "By destroying mine?" "Doctor," Pritchard sighed as if I was being difficult for no reason, "by fulfilling your role." Illy's voice was low, controlled. "Sir," she said, "no." "Doctor," Pritchard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You will be quiet." Illy didn't move. "I won't force her." A long moment passed. Then Doctor Pritchard's softness vanished. His voice dropped into something colder. "Listen to me, both of you. If this doesn't happen, your husband will solve the problem another way, and the other way is always worse." He stepped closer, lantern light sharpening the lines of his face. "Mrs. Renford," he whispered, "do you know what happens to a woman in Georgia who cannot produce an heir?" I stared at him. He smiled faintly. "She becomes replaceable." Then he left the stable and the lock clicked again. I stood in the dark, shaking, and realized the doctor wasn't just a messenger. He was a partner, and the question wasn't whether Malcolm would ruin me. The question was what Malcolm and the doctor were really buying with my ruin, because no man spends hundreds of dollars bribing a physician just to satisfy pride. Men like Malcolm spend money to protect something bigger, something that if exposed would destroy them. The next weeks became a kind of fever. Malcolm began attending church more often, smiling wider, shaking hands like a politician. He hosted dinners, invited neighbors, spoke casually about family blessings as if he could conjure them through conversation. Meanwhile, the stable lock remained. Every other night, Malcolm sent me there. Sometimes he watched from outside, silent, like a man waiting for a machine to produce a result. Sometimes Dr. Pritchard came, always calm, always saying, "This will be easier if you accept it." Illy never touched me unless I spoke first. He would sit on the stool, hands clasped, eyes lowered, as if he were anchoring himself to restraint. One night, when Malcolm stormed away furious because nothing was happening fast enough, Illy whispered, "He wants you blamed." I turned toward him, breath-catching. "What?" Illy's voice was barely audible. "A man like him, he don't just want an heir. He wants a story, one where he stays clean." My skin prickled. "A story." I whispered. Illy nodded slightly. "If you get with child, he'll say it's his. If it gets out, it ain't. He'll say you tempted me. He'll make you the sinner and me the devil." I stared at the dirt floor, realizing something sickening. Malcolm had purchased a scapegoat as carefully as he'd purchased a solution, and suddenly the anonymous note made more sense. Barren is a verdict they sell. Maybe Dr. Pritchard didn't just sell barrenness. Maybe he sold stories, stories that protected men like Malcolm. I needed proof, not suspicion. Proof. So I began collecting it the only way a woman like me could, quietly, patiently, like a thief in her own life. I watched Dr. Pritchard's hands when he visited. I noticed the way he tucked a small notebook into his coat before he left. I noticed the smell of laudanum, sweet and sharp on his cuffs. I noticed that he always asked Ruth for tea, and once Afternoon, when Ruth was sent to fetch linens, I went into the kitchen and asked the cook a simple question. What does the doctor like to drink? The cook frowned. Tea, Mom, always tea with sugar. The cook shook her head. No, Mom, he says, sugar rots the teeth. I nodded, then asked, and what does Ruth put in it? The cook blinked. Whatever you ask her to do to, Mom. The answer was ordinary, and that's what terrified me, because ordinary people can be used to do monstrous things without even realizing it. That night, when Dr. Pritchard arrived, I watched Ruth pour the tea. Her hand shook just slightly. Doctor. Pritchard lifted the cup. I said sharply, don't. Everyone froze. Doctor. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. I stepped forward, heart pounding. I said, don't. Malcolm, who had come to the stable this time, stared at me like I'd slapped him. What are you doing? He hissed. I looked at Ruth. What did you put in that cup? Ruth's face went pale. Doctor. Pritchard set the cup down slowly, smile returning as if he was amused. Mrs. Renfood, you're hysterical. I walked to the cup, dipped my finger into the tea and touched it to my tongue. Bitter, not tea bitter. Chemical. My stomach turned. I looked at Malcolm. Why is your doctor drugging me? Malcolm's face went still. Too still. For a heartbeat, his eyes flicked to Dr. Pritchard, and in that flicker I saw it. They were not surprised. They were annoyed, like a plan interrupted. Doctor Pritchard's voice became colder. It's to calm you, to make me compliant, I snapped. Malcolm's hand shot out, gripping my wrist painfully. He leaned close, voice low, so only I could hear. Do not embarrass me. I yanked my wrist free, pain flashing. Illy's chains clinked as he shifted, anger tightening his posture. Dr. Pritchard sighed. Malcolm, perhaps you should speak to your wife privately. She's frightened. Malcolm's jaw clenched. Then he turned to Ruth. You, he said softly, dangerously. Go. Ruth fled, tears in her eyes. Malcolm turned back to me, his voice a whisper like a knife. Do you want to know why the doctor calms you? I stared at him, trembling. Because I cannot afford your conscience, Malcolm whispered. I cannot afford your guilt. I need results. Then he stepped back, forced a smile, and said loudly as if speaking to the horses, we'll try again tomorrow. As he left, Dr. Pritchard lingered by the door, eyes on me. You're clever, he murmured, but clever women get hurt when they forget what kind of world this is. Then he left, and I stood there shaking, realizing the taboo wasn't only the locked stable. The taboo was that my body had become a shared project between two men. A project financed by bribes, documented in ledgers, drugged into silence. And somewhere beneath all of it was the real question that burned hotter than humiliation. What else did Malcolm need silence for? 2 days later, I stole Illy's boots. Not in a dramatic way, in the quiet, cowardly way. Women have always had to steal power. Malcolm left early for Savannah. Dr. Pritchard did not come. The overseer, Mr. Gold, was busy whipping men in the far field because a row was crooked. I went to the stable with a basket of bread and a small knife hidden under the cloth. Illy looked up, wary. Ma'am? I knelt, pretending to adjust the basket, and whispered, your boots. Illy's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded once. I slid the knife under the cloth, worked quickly at the stitching inside the boot lining, while Illy sat perfectly still, breathing slow like he was trying not to exist. Lining loosened and something crinkled beneath my fingers. Paper. My heart slammed. I pulled it free and unfolded it. It was a small worn document with faded ink. Too faded to read easily, but I could make out words. Free. Carolina, Elijah, and a seal broken but still visible. My mouth went dry. Illy wasn't just claiming he was free. He had been. I stuffed the paper into my bodice, hands shaking. Illy whispered, that's me. I stared at him. Your name is Elijah. He nodded once. They called me Illy because it's easier to own a shorter name. Something in me cracked. Okay, I whispered. Okay, we can use this. Illy's eyes searched mine. You going to help me? I swallowed. If I don't, Malcolm will kill you the moment he gets what he wants. Illy's jaw tightened. Then we both dead, just different ways. A hoof stomp echoed outside and we froze. Mr. G's voice boomed, annoyed. Mrs. Renford, master wants you inside when he returns. I stood quickly, forcing calm onto my face. As I left, Illy spoke softly, a warning and a promise at once. Ma'am, he ain't just buying me to make a baby. I paused. Illy's voice lowered. He buying me to bury something. That evening, Malcolm returned from Savannah in a mood that smelled like storm. He didn't eat supper. He didn't ask about my day. He went straight to his office, slammed the door, and stayed inside until midnight. Then he came to my bedroom, eyes bright with a strange, restless energy. They're coming, he said. Who? I whispered. He smiled, not kindly. Men who matter. My skin prickled. Why? Because Renford Bank will expand, he said. Because I will be bigger than any man in Savannah. Because my investors will see an heir in my house and trust my name. I stared at him. You're bringing investors here, yes, and you think a child will convince them? Malcolm's smile widened. A child convinces everyone. He climbed into bed beside me, not touching me, just lying there like a presence. Then he whispered, if you ruin this for me, Adelaide, I will ruin you in a way no one will pity. I lay awake after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, hearing Illy's warning in my head. He'd buying me to bury something. Now I understood the heir wasn't for love. It was collateral, a living piece of evidence that Malcolm's life was stable, and if stability was a lie, then Malcolm needed the child to distract from the truth, which meant the truth had to be enormous. The next morning I went back into Malcolm's office. This time I didn't look for payments. I looked for trouble, and I found it in a stack of letters tied with ribbon, hidden behind a ledger labeled Cotton Yields. The letters were from Savannah, from men with titles, from men who wrote politely about concerns. One letter sealed with a bank stamp, not ours, said, Mr. Renford, the auditor arrives in July. Another said, we require proof of liquidity. Another said, your notes are overextended. I felt dizzy. Malcolm's bank wasn't expanding, it was sinking, and an auditor was coming, meaning Malcolm didn't just need an heir for pride. He needed an heir to keep powerful men from looking too closely at his books. He needed a scandal big enough to distract from a collapse, and that's when the most horrifying twist revealed itself as quietly as ink. The stud wasn't only meant to make a baby, he was meant to make noise, loud enough to drown out sound of Malcolm's empire cracking. July came hot and merciless. The auditor arrived with polished manners and sharp eyes, a thin man named Mr. Cobb, who smiled too politely and asked too many questions. Malcolm greeted him like a friend, introduced him to neighbors, walked him through the plantation as if cotton rows could prove solvency. Meanwhile, Malcolm began telling people softly, carefully, that I was finally well, that I was finally hopeful, that God had finally smiled on us. Women at church began touching my arm and whispering, bless you, Adelaide. Men began clapping Malcolm's shoulder like he'd won a war, and Dr. Pritchard, smiling gently, began visiting more often. I realized I was being staged. My body was a theater, and the audience had arrived. One night, after another locked stable visit that left me feeling like my skin didn't belong to me, I went to the washstand and stared at my reflection. I looked like a woman, but I felt like paperwork. Then I noticed something on the inside of my wrist, a faint bruise shaped like fingers. Malcolm had held me too hard at some point, and I hadn't even registered it because my mind was too busy surviving. Ruth entered quietly with fresh water. She saw me staring at the bruise. Her face tightened. For the first time, Ruth looked angry, not at me, but at something unseen. She whispered, he's going to blame you. I turned sharply. What did you say? Ruth swallowed, her hands trembled. Master, he tell me things. He tell me to watch, to listen. He say if the baby come, you got to smile. If it don't, he say folks going to know who to blame. My throat went tight. Why are you telling me this? Ruth's eyes glistened. Because I ain't stupid, ma'am. I see what he doing, and I see what that doctor doing. She hesitated, then whispered, Doctor, Pritchard got a book. A chill crawled up my spine. What kind of book? Ruth looked toward the door as if the walls could hear. A book with names, ladies' names, dates, and money. My heartbeat pounded. Where? Ruth shook her head quickly. I don't know, but I've seen him hold it like a precious. A book, a ledger, a list of women turned into transactions. If I could find that book, I could destroy both of them. Ruth, I whispered, if you help me, Malcolm will punish you. Ruth's mouth twisted. He already punishing everybody, ma'am, just different ways. Then she lowered her voice even more. And that man in the stable, she whispered, he ain't what master say. I heard, mister G say he was stole. My stomach tightened. Illy's free paper burned against my skin where I kept it hidden. Ruth didn't know everything, but she knew enough. And now we had a path. Not a safe path, but a path. The night we found Dr. Pritchard's book. It wasn't because I was brilliant. It was because Malcolm was careless. He hosted a dinner for Mr. Cobb, the auditor, inviting 2 neighboring planters and their wives. He served expensive wine he couldn't afford and laughed too loudly, making jokes about fertile land and fertile women until I wanted to vomit. After dessert, Malcolm led the men to his office for private business talk. The women remained in the parlor, sipping tea, smiling politely, gossiping about dresses. I excused myself, pretending fatigue. Ruth waited in the hallway, eyes wide. Now, she whispered, I nodded, we moved like shadows. Dr. Pritchard had arrived earlier and left his bag in the guest room, trusting that no one would touch it because polite women didn't rummage through doctors' things. Polite women also didn't get locked in stables. I opened the guest room door, heart hammering. The black bag sat on the bed. Ruth stood watch by the door. My fingers shook as I opened the clasp. Inside were instruments, bottles, folded cloth, and beneath them a small notebook bound in dark leather. I pulled it out. The first page made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't medical notes, it was names. Women's names, plantation names, dates, and beside each name, Barren, solution provided, payment amount. I flipped further, breath ragged. Some entries had notes. Wife-resistant calming tonic required. Master impatient recommends stronger stock. Discretion payment increased. And then like a cruel punch I saw it. Adelaide Renford Barren. Solution. Elijah Illy, payment 600. My vision blurred with rage. Ruth whispered horrified. He wrote your name. Yes, I breathed. He wrote me like a product. I flipped again. More names, more money. Then one line that made my breath stop completely. Malcolm Renford, issue, no issue. Recommend external solution. Maintain paternity fiction, payment $300, no issue. Maintain paternity fiction. My mind seized on the words. It meant Malcolm, not me. Malcolm couldn't produce an heir. Dr. Pritchard had declared me barren to protect Malcolm's reputation, to sell Malcolm a way out, to sell Malcolm a scapegoat. Humiliation, the stable, the lock. None of it was even necessary if the truth was simply that Malcolm was the barren one. He had built all of this because he refused to be seen as weak. Ruth's voice shook. What you going to do? I stared at the book, hands trembling, and whispered, I'm going to burn their certainty to the ground. Then footsteps creaked in the hallway. We froze. A door opened down the hall. Male laughter drifted. One of the planters, perhaps, leaving the parlor to find his wife. Ruth's eyes widened in panic. I snapped the book shut, shoved it under my shawl, and whispered, Go. We slipped out, silent, hearts pounding so loud I thought the whole house could hear. Back in my room, I hid the book beneath loose floorboard planks. Then I sat on my bed, shaking, staring at my hands. I had proof. That Malcolm had made me suffer to protect his ego. Proof that Dr. Pritchard made money off women's pain. Proof that Illy had been dragged into this as an instrument, not a person. But proof was dangerous because men like Malcolm didn't fear truth. They feared exposure, and exposure made them violent. 2 days later, Malcolm found out someone had touched Dr. Pritchard's bag. Not because the clasp was broken, because Doctor. Pritchard noticed the book had shifted slightly, the way a careful man notices a chair moved an inch. He came to Renford House at dawn, face pale, softness gone. Malcolm met him in the hallway. I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden behind the railing, listening. Doctor, Pritchard hissed. Someone took my ledger. Malcolm's voice turned icy. Are you accusing me? I'm accusing your house. The doctor snapped. If that book surfaces, you're finished. Malcolm's laugh was low. No, Doctor. If that book surfaces, we're both finished. A pause. Then, Doctor, Pritchard whispered, she suspects, doesn't she? Malcolm's voice sharpened like glass. She suspects whatever I allow her to suspect. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying not to gasp. Then Malcolm said something that made my blood go cold. If Adelaide becomes a problem, Malcolm murmured, I'll make her the problem publicly. I'll ruin her reputation so thoroughly she'll beg me to keep her. Doctor, Pritchard's voice was strained. You can't. I can, Malcolm said calmly, and I will because I am not losing everything over a woman's conscience. He paused, then added softly, find the book. Doctor, Pritchard whispered, and the man in the stable. Malcolm's voice went flat. He disappears as soon as he's no longer useful. My stomach lurched. Illy. Malcolm would destroy him, not because Illy had done anything wrong, because Illy was evidence. That night I went to the stable again, not because Malcolm commanded it, but because I refused to let Illy become an erased footnote. When I entered, Illy looked at my face and immediately knew something had changed. What? He whispered. I pulled the free paper from my bodice and showed him. Illy's breath caught, eyes shining with something like grief. You got it. I found the doctor's ledger, I whispered. It says Malcolm can't have children. Illy stared. So you ain't Barren. No, I said, voice breaking. I will declared Barren so Malcolm wouldn't be. Illy's jaw clenched, anger vibrating in his silence. I swallowed hard. He's going to make me the sinner. He's going to blame me, and he's going to destroy you. Illy's voice was rough. Then we move. How? I whispered. Where? Illy's eyes sharpened. Savannah. Docks. I know men, not safe men, but men who know how to move paper and bodies. I hesitated. If we run, he'll hunt us. Illy's gaze held mine. If we stay, he'll bury us. Either way, it's blood. I swallowed, mind racing. Then I remembered the auditor, Mr. Cobb, a man who cared about ledgers, a man who would care if Malcolm's bank was a fraud. Sighs and gasps, and I remembered something else, too. Malcolm feared exposure more than he feared God. If I could expose him in the right way to the right people at the right time, I could end him without a knife. I whispered, we don't run yet. Illy's brow tightened. Ma'am, we set a trap, I said, voice shaking but steadying as the idea formed. Malcolm wants a story. Fine, we give him one, then we change the ending. Illy stared at me. I whispered, we make him confess his own ruin. The next week, Malcolm announced a celebration, a family supper. He called it inviting neighbors and, most importantly, Mr. Cobb the auditor. He wanted everyone to see me, to see my forced smiles, to see the performance of stability. He wanted to plant the idea that an heir was coming, so the auditor would hesitate to tear the bank apart publicly. Malcolm dressed me in pale blue silk and draped pearls around my throat like a collar. You look lovely, he murmured. I smiled like a knife. At supper, Malcolm raised his glass and said, friends, I have been blessed. The women giggled, leaning forward. Mr. Cobb smiled politely. Malcolm placed a hand on my shoulder, fingers pressing just hard enough to remind me he owned the room. Adelaide smiled too, his gesture said, so I did. I smiled and I said, God has a sense of timing. Malcolm's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. After supper, the men moved to Malcolm's office again, cigars lit, voices low. I stood near the doorway with other women, listening to polite chatter, waiting for my moment. Ruth brushed past me and whispered, Doctor, here. My pulse jumped. I turned slightly and saw Dr. Pritchard entering the hall, face tense, eyes scanning like a predator. He was looking for his book. He was looking for me. I did not flee. I walked straight toward him. Dr. Pritchard's smile snapped into place. Mrs. Renford, doctor, I said warmly, loud enough for the women nearby to hear. How fortunate. You should join us. His eyes narrowed. I have private business with your husband. Oh, I'm sure you do, I said brightly, but perhaps you'd like tea first. Ruth makes it wonderfully, Doctor. Pritchard stiffened slightly, remembering the bitter cup. I leaned closer, voice low, so only he could hear. I have your book. I whispered. The doctor's face went white. I smiled. If you ever drug me again, if you ever threaten me again, if you ever touch that stable lock again, I will place that book into Mr. Cobb's hands, and I will tell him exactly what you meant by maintain paternity fiction. Doctor, Pritchard's mouth tightened. You wouldn't. I tilted my head. Test me. For the first time, Doctor. Pritchard looked afraid, not of Malcolm, of me, because I had discovered the only currency more powerful than money, evidence. The doctor swallowed, then hissed, if Malcolm falls, you fall with him. I smiled sweetly, not if I make sure he drags you down first. Then I stepped back and raised my voice again. Cheerful, Ruth, I called, bring the doctor tea. Dr. Pritchard stared at me, trapped between making a scene and swallowing my terms. He forced a smile and followed Ruth toward the kitchen. I turned toward Malcolm's office. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear now. The trap was set. Now I needed the right moment to spring it. 2 nights later, Mr. Cobb asked to see Renford Bank's private books. Malcolm laughed, smooth as always, of course. He led Mr. Cobb into his office, closing the door. I stood outside, fingers trembling, listening. Inside, Malcolm's voice was confident, charming. You'll find everything in order. Mr. Cobb's voice was polite but firm, I'm sure just routine. Pages turned, silence stretched. Then Mr. Cobb said softly, Mr. Renford, these notes. Malcolm's voice tightened slightly. What about them? Mr. Cobb's voice sharpened. They're not backed. You've issued. Malcolm interrupted, laughter too loud. Mr. Cobb, you're misunderstanding. The expansion requires flexibility. Mr. Cobb's tone went colder. It requires solvency. A pause. Then Malcolm's voice dropped, losing its charm. You don't understand how business works, Mr. Cobb replied, calm but dangerous. I understand fraud. The word hung like a gunshot. My breath caught inside. Malcolm's chair scraped. His voice turned low. Be careful. Mr. Cobb didn't flinch. I will be. I'm giving you one chance to explain why your books do not match your claims. Another silence. Then, to my shock, Malcolm's voice softened again. Too soft, Mr. Cobb, he said quietly. Would you like a drink? Bribery? My stomach twisted. Mr. Cobb's voice was sharp. No, I knew then that Malcolm was cornered, and cornered men did not become gentle. They became vicious. I backed away from the door, heart racing, and hurried down the hall to the floorboard where I'd hidden Dr. Pritchard's ledger. I pulled it out, hands shaking. Then I went straight to the parlor where Mr. Cobb's coat lay draped over a chair. I slid the ledger beneath it, a silent gift, a bomb tucked under politeness. Then I returned to the hallway, standing near the stairs like a wife waiting for news. The office door opened. Mr. Cobb stepped out, face controlled, but his eyes had sharpened into something harder. Malcolm followed, smiling too wide. Mr. Cobb is tired, Malcolm announced loudly. We'll continue tomorrow. Mr. Cobb nodded politely. Yes, tomorrow. He walked down the hall toward the guest room. As he passed me, his gaze flicked to my face. One quick glance, then away, but in that glance I saw it. He knew he had seen the ledger under his coat, and he understood exactly what it meant. Malcolm watched him go, then turned to me. For a heartbeat, Malcolm's smile vanished. His eyes were pure calculation. What have you done? He whispered. I smiled gently like a beautiful wife. I prayed, I said. Malcolm's face tightened. Then he leaned in close, voice like venom. If you've crossed me, Adelaide, I will destroy you so thoroughly, you'll beg to be Barren. Then he walked away, and I realized the next twist was coming fast. Malcolm wasn't going to wait to ruin me. He was going to do it tonight. He came for me after midnight. Not with tenderness, with purpose. He took my wrist and dragged me down the hall, not caring if the servants heard. He led me outside toward the stable, lantern swinging, his grip painful. You think you're clever? He hissed. You think you can play banker with me? I struggled. Malcolm, He yanked me closer. You want to know the truth. Fine, the truth is you are a liability, a barren liability, and liabilities get managed. He shoved me into the stable and slammed the door. The lock clicked. Illy was already inside, eyes snapping to me, alarmed. Malcolm's voice came through the door like a judge's verdict. Tonight, he said, coldly, you will give me what I paid for, and tomorrow, if anyone asks questions, I will have a story ready. My blood turned to ice. Illy moved toward me, chains clinking, voice low and urgent. Mom. I pressed my hand to my mouth, breath ragged. Malcolm wasn't just threatening, he was manufacturing evidence. If I emerged from the stable shattered, Malcolm could claim I'd been unfaithful, that I'd fallen, that I'd tempted Illy. He could ruin me publicly to distract from his bank. He could make the scandal about my body instead of his fraud. Illy's eyes were fierce. He ain't touching you like that tonight. How? I whispered. He holds the key. Illy's gaze flicked around the stable, scanning. Then his eyes locked onto something behind me. The feed trough. The loose board near the back wall. Illy moved quick despite chains and crouched. He whispered, this board been loose. He jammed his fingers under it, pried. A narrow gap appeared just large enough for a hand. Illy reached in and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a small metal file. My breath caught. Illy looked at me, grim. I've been waiting. Clear his throat, he lifted the file toward his ankle chain. I stared, shocked. Had that the whole time? Illy's jaw tightened. You survive by planning. He began filing, movement small and controlled. Outside, Malcolm's footsteps paced like a predator. I whispered, shaking, if he catches you. Illy didn't look up. Then he catches me free. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the chain link weakened. Illy snapped it with a brutal twist. Then he moved to the stable door, pressing his ear to it. Silence. Malcolm had gone back toward the house, perhaps to prepare his lie. Illy whispered, we move now. But the lock. Illy pointed upward. The stable's small side window meant for air sat high near the roof. Illy grabbed a crate, stacked it, motioning for me. I climbed, hard pounding, and Illy boosted me up. I squeezed through, dress snagging, tearing slightly. I dropped outside into the cool night air. Stumbling, Illy followed, hauling himself through with control. Urgency? He landed lightly, eyes scanning the darkness. For a heartbeat, we stood free under the Georgia sky. Then Illy whispered, where's that book? In the house. I breathed, but Mr. Cobb has it now. Illy's eyes widened. Then your husband done? Not yet, I whispered. He'll fight. Illy nodded once. Then we finish it. We moved toward the house like ghosts. Ruth waited by the back door, eyes wide, clutching a shawl. You out? She whispered, shocked. No time, I breathed. Where's Mr. Cobb? Ruth swallowed. Guest room. He awake. He told me, if master try anything, go get the sheriff. My pulse spiked. The sheriff? Ruth nodded. He in town, but I can send a boy. I grabbed Ruth's hands, fierce. Do it. Ruth turned and ran. I looked at Illy. You need to get off this property. Illy's jaw tightened. Not till you're safe. I won't be safe until Malcolm is stopped, I whispered. Then we heard it, a door slamming. Malcolm's voice, loud and furious, in the hallway. I'd have lied. He'd discovered the empty stable. He was coming. Illy's eyes locked onto mine. Go to Cobb. I nodded, heart pounding, and rushed up the back stairs toward the guest room. Mr. Cobb opened the door before I even knocked, eyes sharp. He held Dr. Pritchard's ledger in his hand. I suspected, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. My husband will try to blame me. Mr. Cobb's jaw tightened. He will fail. A shout erupted downstairs. Malcolm's voice, furious, frantic. Where is she? Mr. Cobb moved to the window, looking down. Then his eyes widened slightly. He whispered, and that man... I froze. Illy was sprinting across the yard toward the tree line, chains broken, moving like someone who had been waiting to run his whole life. Malcolm's footsteps thundered up the stairs. Mr. Cobb turned to me, voice urgent. Mrs. Renford, if you want mercy from the law, you tell me everything now. So I did. I told him about the stable. I told him about Dr. Pritchard's bribery. I told him about Malcolm's bank letters. I told him about Illy's free paper and kidnapping. And as I spoke, Malcolm burst into the guest room doorway like a storm. His face was twisted with rage. Then he saw Mr. Cobb holding the ledger. Malcolm went still. All his charm vanished. All his certainty cracked. For the first time, Malcolm Renford looked like a man without a plan. He lunged forward. "That's private." "Mr." Cobb's voice was calm, lethal. "So is fraud." Malcolm's gaze snapped to me, eyes blazing. "You hissed. "You did this." I lifted my chin, voice trembling but firm. "You did this." Malcolm's smile became ugly. "You think anyone will believe you? A barren wife, a hysterical woman. They'll believe me. They'll believe the banker. They'll believe the husband." "Mr." Cobb stepped forward, ledger raised, slightly like a weapon. "They'll believe numbers," Mr. Cobb said coldly, "and they'll believe this." Malcolm's eyes flicked to the ledger, then to me again. Something in him shifted. Pure survival. He grabbed my arm, yanking me toward him, gripping hard enough to bruise. "If I fall," he whispered. "Wilded, you fall with me," Mr. Cobb snapped. "Release her." Malcolm laughed sharply. "Or what? You'll arrest me in my own house." A voice echoed from downstairs. "Mr. Renford, the sheriff." Ruth had done it. Malcolm's grip tightened painfully. He leaned close to my ear and whispered, voice shaking, "You were supposed to be quiet." Then he released me abruptly, turning toward the window like he was calculating escape routes. Mr. Cobb moved to the door, calling down, "Sheriff, up here." Footsteps pounded. Malcolm's face twisted. In a flash, he snatched Dr. Pritchard's ledger from Mr. Cobb's hand and hurled it into the fireplace. Flames caught the paper immediately. My heart seized. Evidence gone, but Mr. Cobb didn't panic. He simply smiled, because Mr. Cobb had already done what bankers do best. He had copied what mattered. He pulled a folded packet from his coat, pages he'd quietly removed earlier. Malcolm saw the packet and went pale. The sheriff entered breathless, hand on his belt. Mr. Cobb spoke clearly. "Sheriff Malcolm Renford's bank is under audit. His books show fraud. This ledger shows bribery and conspiracy, and that enslaved man on his property appears to be a kidnapped free citizen." The sheriff blinked, stunned. Malcolm straightened, forcing charm back onto his face like putting on a mask. "Sheriff," he said smoothly, "this is nonsense. My wife is unwell. The auditor is confused. We can resolve this privately." Mr. Cobb's voice was icy. "Fraud is not private." Malcolm's eyes flicked to me one last time, hatred pure. Then the sheriff said the words that shattered Malcolm's world. "Mr. Renford, you're coming with me." Malcolm laughed once, sharp and hollow. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, not with surrender, but with the realization that his certainty had finally run out. As the sheriff grabbed his arm, Malcolm whispered to me, voice low enough only I could hear, "You think you won?" I met his gaze, shaking, and whispered back, "No, I think you're finally seen." Dr. Pritchard tried to flee the next day. He packed his bag, tried to ride out before sunrise, but Mr. Cobb had sent riders to town with copies of pages from the ledger and letters from Malcolm's bank. By the time Dr. Pritchard reached the main road, 2 deputies were waiting. The doctor protested, smiling, insisting it was all misunderstanding. The deputies did not smile back, and in the weeks that followed, Savannah buzzed like a hive. Malcolm Renford, the banker, the planter, the man who shook hands in church, was accused of fraud. People who once praised him suddenly claimed they'd always found him too ambitious. The investors he tried to impress turned into witnesses against him. The neighbors who'd eaten his wine and laughed at his jokes stopped inviting me to tea. They looked at me with the same tilted head pity they'd used when I was Barren, but now the pity had something uglier in it. Curiosity, scandal. They wanted a story, and Malcolm had tried to give them one where I was the villain, so I gave them a different one. At the hearing, crowded, sweltering, full of whispers, I stood straight and told the truth without describing what didn't need describing. I said my husband locked me in a stable to force an heir. I said the doctor drugged me. I said Dr. Pritchard's ledger proved he sold verdicts to protect men. I said Malcolm bribed him because Malcolm could not produce. Air, the courtroom murmured like wind through dry leaves. A woman speaking like that was its own taboo, but Mr. Cobb's papers spoke louder. Numbers do not blush. Numbers do not avert their eyes. Numbers do not care about Malcolm's charm. The judge did. The judge frowned at me often, but the judge frowned at the bank papers more. Malcolm's face grew tighter with each page read aloud. Then, finally, the judge said something that made Malcolm's jaw crack with rage. "Mr. Renford, your bank will be seized pending investigation." Seized, the word Malcolm feared more than any insult because it meant the iron box under his desk would be opened by strangers. It meant his secrets would be counted, measured, named. Malcolm turned to glare at me, and in that glare I saw the truth I'd been circling since June. Malcolm never wanted an heir because he loved a child. He wanted an heir because he loved leverage, and now the leverage was gone. As for Elijah, he did not return to the plantation after that night. 2 days after Malcolm's arrest, I found Ruth in the kitchen holding a small scrap of paper. "A boy brought this," Ruth whispered. The paper held only 3 words in a familiar hand. "I'm not buried." I pressed the note to my chest, tears burning, not because the story was romantic, because it was just, because someone Malcolm tried to erase had survived, because the stud Malcolm bought had become the one thing Malcolm could never purchase, a witness. In October, after Malcolm's bank collapsed, after men in Savannah stopped saying his name with respect, after Dr. Pritchard's practice was ruined and his ledger's surviving pages traveled through whisper networks like fire, Malcolm sent me a letter from jail. It was short. It did not apologize. Malcolm did not believe in apologies. It said, "You have destroyed yourself with me. No man will want you now." I read it once, then I folded it carefully and I burned it, because Malcolm had always misunderstood what I was. He thought I existed to be wanted. He thought my value depended on a man's approval. He thought barrenness made me worthless. But in destroying his certainty, I had discovered something fierce. I did not need to be chosen. I could choose. Snorts, I sold a portion of the land, enough to secure my freedom from Malcolm legally, enough to pay debts Malcolm left like poison behind. People gossiped. People stared. I let them because gossip is only power when you fear it, and on a cold morning in late November, a carriage arrived at my gate. A driver I did not recognize handed Ruth a sealed note. Ruth brought it to me with shaking hands. Inside was a folded document stamped with an official seal, a menu mission paper. Not for everyone on the plantation. Georgia did not loosen its grip that easily, but for one name, Elijah, beneath it, 3 words written in the same hand as before. Paid in truth, I stared, breath trembling. Mr. Cobb had done it. He had used Malcolm's collapse, Malcolm's debt, Malcolm's desperate need to bargain, force a release, not because the world was suddenly kind, because the world was suddenly embarrassed, and embarrassment can move chains when morality won't. That night, I walked alone to the stable. The lock was still there, rusting now, hanging like a dead thing. I touched it, remembering the click, the key, the way my life had narrowed to a door. Then I opened the stable wide and left it open, not as a gesture, as a decision, because no woman should ever live behind a man's certainty again, and no man should ever be bought and used like a tool to protect another man's pride. Malcolm had bought a stud to bury his weakness. Instead, he bought the proof that exposed him. He tried to turn me into a scandal to distract from his fraud. Instead, his fraud became the scandal that destroyed him. He tried to lock truth inside a stable. Instead, truth ran, and it did not come back. You want more stories where the powerful build cages and the truth burns them down from the inside. Make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments. Would you have exposed Malcolm the moment you found the ledger? Or would you have waited, like I did, until he couldn't escape the ending?